Martha woke before dawn as the sky slowly turned a pale gray, and she felt a strange unease lingering in her chest that she could not explain yet. She pushed it aside and prepared breakfast for herself and her cat, while thinking about the old man across the street and the way his hands shook whenever he reached for a cup. And she wondered if he ate properly or if anyone ever noticed the thin lines of worry etched on his face. And as she sipped her coffee, she saw a figure move behind the curtain in Mr. Alden's living room, and her heart skipped a beat. The day started like any other, with Martha walking across the quiet street carrying a basket of freshly baked bread, and when she knocked on the door she heard a faint cough and a shuffling of feet. And when Mr. Alden opened the door, he looked smaller somehow, as if the years had stacked up on him overnight, and he tried to speak, but his voice cracked, and Martha stepped inside, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. And when she looked at the table, she noticed a stack of unopened letters with her name written on the top one, and she hesitated. Inside the letter was a note written in a shaky hand that said, "Thank you for your kindness, but do not trust everyone who comes knocking." And Martha frowned because she had never seen him so secretive before. And when she raised her eyes, she noticed a photograph taped to the back of the envelope showing a younger Mr. Alden standing with a stern-looking man in a suit, and the caption read, "My grandson, Oliver." And she felt a strange knot tighten in her stomach. The day dragged on, with Martha tidying up the kitchen and dusting the shelves, while Mr. Alden sat in his chair staring out the window, as if the world outside no longer existed, and every few minutes he would mutter fragments of sentences about papers and money and family disputes, and Martha tried to follow along, but the words made less sense the more she listened, and just as she was about to ask a question, she heard a loud knock at the door that rattled the frame, and she froze, not knowing who could be there. Standing outside was a man she had never seen before, in an expensive suit with a polished look and cold gray eyes. And he introduced himself as Oliver, and said he was here to take care of some family business, and Martha felt a chill run down her spine, because there was something in his tone that suggested she was in the middle of a trap she had not anticipated. And as she tried to explain that she had only come to help the old man, he smiled thinly and said some things were better left unsaid. Martha stepped back into the house, feeling the weight of the walls closing in on her. And when she glanced at Mr. Alden, he did not move or speak, and it was as if he had become a statue frozen in time. And she realized that the quiet routine she had built over weeks was about to shatter. And as she looked around the room, she noticed that the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and the sunlight streaming in through the curtains could not reach the corners of the ceiling. She decided to make tea to calm her nerves, and while pouring hot water, she noticed a loose floorboard near the corner of the room that had never been there before, and her curiosity pushed her to kneel down and lift it. And underneath she found an envelope sealed with red wax, and the letters M.A. scratched into the surface, and her hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside, and it contained a list of names, addresses, and dates, and she felt the weight of a secret that Mr. Alden had carried for decades. The sound of footsteps in the hall startled her, and she quickly slid the envelope into her apron pocket and turned to see Oliver standing in the doorway with a questioning look. And he said nothing, but the silence was heavier than any words could have been, and Martha realized that he had been watching her every move, and there was a dangerous intelligence behind his eyes that made her step back toward the kitchen table as if the air itself had turned hostile. And just as she reached the table, she felt the floor tremble beneath her feet. Hours passed, and Martha tried to make small talk with Mr. Alden, while Oliver sat silently reading papers she had never seen. And each time she glanced at the envelope tucked under her arm, she felt a pulse of fear, because it seemed to hum with a story she could not yet tell. And when she finally asked Mr. Alden about it, he only shook his head and whispered a single word that made her blood run cold: warning, and she did not know whether it was meant for her or the man in the suit. The afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows, and the room felt colder than it should. And Martha noticed that the clock on the wall had stopped ticking at 3:15, and she wondered if time itself had paused in the house, or if it was merely her imagination running wild. But before she could dwell on it, a loud crash came from the back room, and the sound of breaking glass echoed through the house, and she ran to see what had happened. and found nothing but a chair lying on its side as if someone had left in a hurry. Martha began to question what she had gotten herself into because the old man seemed fragile. Yet the house itself felt alive with hidden stories and secret passages that whispered to her if she would only listen. And she felt a shiver down her spine when she noticed that the photographs on the walls were not all familiar, and some depicted people she did not recognize, and one in particular had a shadowy figure lurking behind Mr. Alden in the background, and she could swear the eyes were following her. Evening fell and the first streetlights flickered outside, casting long shadows across the living room, and Martha moved cautiously as she prepared a small dinner, hoping to calm the atmosphere. But the tension between the three of them was thick and palpable, and just as she set the plates on the table, she heard Oliver mutter something about inheritance and obligations that made her stomach twist, and she realized that what had begun as a kind gesture had transformed into a delicate game where every word and action could have consequences, far beyond what she could see. As night deepened, the wind picked up and rattled the windows, and Martha noticed that the envelope in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute, and she could feel the presence of something unseen brushing against the edges of her mind, as if the house itself was warning her to beware. And when she finally approached Mr. Alden to ask him directly about Oliver and the letters, he only looked at her with eyes full of fear and said, "Do not trust him not." Yet, and she felt a knot tighten in her chest because she did not understand the half of what he knew. Martha could not sleep, and she wandered the quiet rooms listening to the creaks and groans of the old house as if it had a heartbeat of its own. And every shadow seemed to move with intent, and every whisper of wind sounded like a voice trying to speak a warning. And she realized that her simple act of kindness had pulled her into a world of secrets and danger. And as she peered through the living room window, she saw Oliver standing outside in the darkness, and the way he was staring at the house made her shiver, because she knew he was waiting and watching and plotting. And the next morning could change everything. The next morning, Martha woke to the sound of rain tapping against the windows and a strange heaviness in the air, as if the storm outside had reached inside the house, and she felt the envelope burning against her side and knew she could not ignore it any longer. And when she approached Mr. Alden, he was sitting quietly in his chair staring at the floor, and she tried to speak, but he only shook his head and whispered, "Stay calm and wait," and the words made no sense. But she obeyed, because something in his tone carried a weight she could not defy. Oliver arrived shortly after, carrying a briefcase that seemed far too large for the documents inside, and he moved through the house with a cold precision that made Martha shrink back with every step, and he began asking questions about Mr. Alden's daily routines and possessions, and Martha felt as if she were walking a tightrope over an abyss, and just when she thought she could breathe, a sharp knock came at the door, followed by the stern voice of a lawyer she had never met, and the room grew tense as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. While the adults argued, Martha slipped quietly to the back of the house and opened the envelope she had hidden, and inside were photographs and letters, and a key and instructions scrawled in Mr. Alden's hand saying, "Find the room before it is too late." And Martha felt a rush of fear and excitement, because she realized that the old man had left a secret for her to uncover, and that someone was clearly trying to stop her from discovering it. And as she followed the instructions, she noticed the floorboard she had found earlier, and felt the key fitting perfectly into a hidden lock. The hidden room revealed stacks of papers, old photographs and documents, detailing a fortune and secret business dealings that no one in the neighborhood had ever suspected. And Martha began to piece together the truth that Mr. Alden had protected for decades, and her heart raced, because she understood now why Oliver was so determined and ruthless. And just as she lifted a bundle of letters, she heard the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps on the stairs, and she froze, knowing that if she was discovered, everything could be lost. Turning quickly, she hid behind a large cabinet and watched as Oliver entered the hall, his eyes scanning the room with suspicion, and he paused as if sensing she was nearby and whispered, "Mr. Alden said something about trust and betrayal," and Martha's pulse quickened because she realized he had begun to suspect the secret she had uncovered, and she knew that if she did not act quickly, she might never have another chance to reveal the truth.